Welcome everyone to this kickoff webinar of the new working group on housing and new technologies. This is the first event that we organized for this new working group that was approved, in fact, last June by the Coordination Committee of the European Network for Housing Research. Professor Folz and I decided to promote this group since we noticed that there was a lack of a specialized forum to discuss the use of new technologies, both in housing research and also in housing transactions and processes. We are pleased for the response to the call for papers. Today, around 12 researchers will present their findings on the use of new technologies on housing, covering topics such as the use of data methods, blockchain, real estate crowdfunding, smart cities, data protection, among others. And the attention to these seminars by international scholars suggests the importance of this debate, not only in Europe, but also worldwide. I would like, first of all, to thank you all for joining this seminar, to the speakers for sharing their research with us, and also to the UNESCO Housing Chair of the Rovira Virgili University and to the University of Groningen for hosting this event. Now, I would like to give the floor to Professor Woolhofer. He's the chairman of the European Network for Housing Research and will address some words to us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rosa, for inviting me, and also congratulations with your first official activity, this seminar. What Michel also said, it's quite an event, because there are not so many workshops who are actually having online workshops nowadays. So there are a few, but yeah, it's very good to start. I'm also very happy with the start of this working group in June. I think it's really quite new. It is interesting new technologies, and yeah, they have a broad overlap with other teams, of course, also which we do in the network. Actually, myself, I had some students which did work on blockchain and mortgages. It's a pity that I couldn't bring them in. It was 2 years ago, but I think I can ask them to join you. That's like blockchain, crowdfunding, robotics. Yeah, these are all new items, technology items, which could be quite important for also housing, and maybe it will also have influence on the way we think about operating housing projects. And yeah, it's for many, I think many participants of ENHR, also in the other working groups, it could be quite interesting. Actually, that's also the discussion we had in the coordination committee. Is it not too much also covered by other groups? But yeah, okay. I think if you come to conferences, and maybe you can have some input also at plenaries, then we could try to find the correspondence with the other working groups. So that the integration will be quite important, and also the connection, I think, with the legal group and also the ethical aspects are quite important here. So there's already a connection probably. And I think I already explained it's quite innovative what you're doing. So it's a real asset for the network. So I really hope that you will succeed, and that in about 1 or 2 years we can establish an official working group. So that would be great. And especially the connection with the other groups, I think, is very important, and we should try also from the secretariat to assist you and to try to find ways to connect with other people. Actually, what you're doing now is quite perfect. Organizing seminars also outside the conferences, but that gives people the opportunity who are active in the other groups also to join this group. So we have the group on comparative housing policy. They do the same. They always have a conference of always 1 or 2 years, every 1 or 2 years, and then. But what you see is that also people from other groups are joining. So yeah, that's very promising. Maybe some small news from ENHR. We have just yesterday we launched a new website. So yeah, we have a special item on news. So if you have some results of this of this conference, we can put it quite in the front on the website, on the news. So please use that opportunity. That would be great. There is also maybe we can also make a connection. We have a kind of a seminar, housing-related impacts of the pandemic, of the COVID, and that will be at the end of February. There will be two online meetings. It starts in plenary on just half a day in the afternoon, February 12th, and then there will be some presentations about COVID and the housing market, and there's some discussions already. And then there are several now who are actually active. They will have meetings in between, so the last 2 weeks of February. And then there will be a closing meeting on February 25, and then there will be reporting back from the different working groups. And maybe if you in this seminar also have some connection with the pandemic, you can also give some small input about the results of your conference, because then, very shortly all these results will be discussed. And this is then, it's before the 12th, but it doesn't matter. So maybe we can also make, and there's some debates also, so maybe you can participate also in this one. So we can have some context about this later on, but there's a possibility to bring it to a broader audience. Now, and the conferences, you're always welcome to organize also on the conferences, of course. The next conference will be in Nicosia. It's starting the 3rd of August until the 2nd of September. It's for sure that it will also be online, but we also try to make it lively. So probably lots of people can come to Nicosia by the end of August, hopefully. But if you want to be part of it online, it's also possible. And then we have conferences in 2022 now for Rosa. That will be quite easy, but because it's in Barcelona. So for you, it's you can come up with lots of people over there. And then we have the conference in 2023 in Lodz. So please be in contact with the organizers and try to organize also maybe a workshop over there. I would like to end and wish you all a good seminar, and I hope to meet many of you in the near future. So success and thanks for organizing. On behalf of the whole CC.
Thank you, Professor, for addressing those words to us. We will try, of course, the collaboration with other working groups. In fact, today will join us also the coordinator of the working group on housing and aging populations.
Okay.
Because of the interest of new technologies also for this sector of people. So we will try to make it. And now we can start with the scientific part of the seminar. We have structured it in two parts. The first one, Professor Folz and I will make a short overview on the research that we are undertaking in our labs. And after that, there will be 3 sessions. The first one on data methods and digital rights, the second one on smart cities and smart homes, and the third one on technologies to design or to manage our homes. At the end of the seminar, Professor Folz will be in charge of the closure tool. I give now the floor to Professor Folz, who will present on the use of machine learning techniques to analyze big data on evictions.
Thanks so much, Rosa. So welcome to all of you. I start sharing my screen. I hope you see my screen on now. Do you see my screen? Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, thanks Rosa for doing all the organizing. It's a great pleasure to coordinate this group together with you. And when we first start with this group discussing it last year, even before the COVID crisis, we thought this is an excellent idea to bring people together that are interested in new technologies. And for us, there's basically 2 strands of these new technologies. So first, these new technologies like blockchain, as Professor Buhauer just said, are influencing mortgage systems, are influencing housing systems in a whole, are influencing maintenance of housing, are influencing rent control, and so on. So they have an impact. So do AI robots who work in homes, do they have specific rights, or how can they be controlled? What's the impact of the living experience of people in these houses? Everybody gets that point, right? So that's interesting. The second thing we found interesting is that these new technologies also impact us as researchers. So there are all kind of new methods and methodologies to study data, housing related data. And in our talk, so in my talk, I will mainly focus on new methodologies and new methods to study housing, traditional housing data. And Rosa Maria will more discuss like how new technologies will impact things that housing scholars study and analyze. And also in the next sections, so in the different parts, we will have presentations on both aspects. So, and I hope there will be a fruitful collaboration and also an interdisciplinary approach towards housing. So there I second what Professor Buhauer said, that we hope to work together with all the working groups, with lawyers, non-lawyers, architecture people, and also sociologists. It would be great, right? So to have this interdisciplinary group. So let's first start with with my presentation. So I gave the title New Technologies in Housing Law Data. As many of you know, I'm mostly studying evictions in Europe and outside Europe. And I'm a lawyer, so I study legal protection against eviction. As you all know, during the COVID crisis, eviction is extremely important. And you also know that now, at this moment, I guess, Donald Trump is being replaced by Biden. And what did he introduce to be one of his first decrees that he will issue is to extend the eviction ban. So it's not, or landlords or courts are not evicting people anymore from their homes, and also to start rent assistance. Still, in the Netherlands, we see such an eviction ban as well, and in other countries as well. But still, I expect that after the pandemic and even during the pandemic, and the research already shows it, that there's below the surveys, there are already a lot of people losing their homes. The eviction will be on the rise. That's, of course, horrible. But from a research perspective and a data perspective, that's interesting. Because there will be more data to study to answer, for example, my question, whether law is really effective in keeping these people in their home. And last year, the European Research Council gave me a European Research Council starting grant, and the coming 5 years. So from the 1st of January, I started with a new project where we're actually going to study evictions and the legal protection offered against evictions. And what's interesting about this project is that we use all kind of new technologies that can help to analyze this legal data. And today I want to discuss something I want to discuss these new methods and how they help and how they work. These new methods, in my case, are machine learning techniques. So what are machine learning techniques? And how can we use them to study housing law, and why should we do that? So, for example, it saves time. So, as you all already know as a lawyer, but also from other perspectives, there's just this tsunami of data coming towards us. It's impossible to study this manually, especially with housing law judgments. Only in the Netherlands, there are over 30,000 eviction judgments yearly. And lawyers try to keep up and studying this eviction judgment. Of course, that's impossible, and it's boring because most of these cases are really simple, and it's just a judge looking at the case and then say this tenant has to leave or not. With machine learning, we can save a lot of time, and we can also study data that's now understudied. So what can we do? We can automatically identify cases in this large group, the whole population of case law, and we can also automatically classify this data. So what does that mean? And so we're going to develop that, because this does not exist yet in this project. So for example, in the case of eviction, is that machine learning can help us to find, for example, that this specific case in these millions of cases deals with eviction. So that's automatic identification. So you can go to an online interface and just see our weekly update on new eviction cases in this enormous amount of case law published in the Netherlands, rechtspraak.nl, but there will be similar cases in Spain or similar websites in Spain and in Israel and wherever on the world. And then machine learning, and so they can automatically identify interesting cases for this housing researcher, but it can also automatically classify cases. So in many cases, it's quite unclear where the case is about, or you need to have a lawyer look at this case and say, so this case deals, for example, with human rights. So this is a tenant that says, don't evict me because I have children and it's a COVID and that violates my human rights. But that takes a lot of time, but we can learn computers to automatically classify that type of cases. So that's a real potential for these machine learning techniques, and that really helps lawyers saving time and study data that are now understudied. But there is another reason why this is interesting, because we actually can learn new things. Because if we automatically identify these cases and also find classifiers for these cases, these classifiers can learn of something. So it's very interesting for me to see, so why is this specific word or this specific sentence in the judgment a classifier? Why does the computer say that this specific case deals with human rights or not, or deals with eviction or not, or deals with mortgages or not? Why does the computer say so? So what words are associated or what sentences are associated with this case? And we can learn something about that. For example, in my project, we're going to predict, so when a court is going to evict someone. So what are classifiers for this judgment of eviction? Do we see, for example, that if a tenant says, I have children, that is a classifier for not evicting people? Or don't we find that? And even the last finding is interesting. So why don't we find that this specific mentioning of children isn't a classifier for non-eviction? So this seems very futuristic, maybe, but it's doable. So how does it work? So first you need to collect data. So we already said, so there is a lot of data available. Maybe not enough eviction data yet in all member states, because it's data from court of first instance, so the lower courts are not published yet, but I expect that they will be published in 5 years' time. There will be a lot of open data also from lower court cases. So then you need to divide the data, so the judgment in a training set and a test set. So this is basically machine learning for a crash course, or I would say for dummies, but you're not dummies. It's a crash course machine learning. So you divide all these judgments on eviction or on whatever case it is in a training set and a test set. Then you develop an algorithm with this training set. So how does that work? So you say to the computer, this case is an eviction and this case is not about an eviction. And I give you all the words in the judgment, and now learn which words are the best classifiers for an eviction or non-eviction. Then you have this algorithm, and you can train and retrain it and retrain it. And then you can test that algorithm with a test set. So, and for the test set, you don't say to the computer which case is about eviction and which isn't about eviction. And then the computer can try to automatically classify what he thinks or she thinks is an eviction case or not. And then we can learn something about the classifier. So what's a classifier in this case? As said, so this sounds very futuristic, but we already did this. So last month, we presented Yuri, which is a little robot. You can find it online, yurisays.com. And what this robot automatically does is collect all the case law of the European Court on Human Rights on a monthly basis. Then it collects another type of document. It's called a communicated case, where the court says this case will be ruled in 4 years' time by the European Court, and the European Court needs to decide whether there's a violation of the European Convention on Human Rights or there isn't a violation on human rights. So we train Yuri, so this little computer, with these documents, and now we have an overall accuracy of nearly 72%. So in 72%, we correctly predict the outcome of the court judgment of the European Court of Human Rights. That's very interesting, of course, and Yuri learns everything, or learns from its mistakes. So every day, every month, the model gets better. I want to stress that it's not replacing judgment. We're only we're predicting judgments. It's something else than giving a decision. We can have a discussion on that later if people find that very interesting. But now we can have it on a 71.7% accuracy. So how does this? So what we also found is, so what's interesting on URI. So that's interesting. We just updated it, or it automatically updated for the last month, and I found a case about eviction, about housing law from last week. It's a Ukrainian case, or the case is about a person who lives in Ukraine and is being evicted by his landlord or by the government who owns his place. URI says there is a violation. So here it says I predicted with a probability of 62%. That there will be a violation, and the court correctly, or the jury was correct, so it predicted it correctly. So what's interesting, and I think that interested me more than just building this best predictor model, is so what are the predictors in this case, and in other cases, what are the classifiers? What does jury use to see why it's a violation in this case or not? And then later on we can use that for the eviction, for example. So in this case, you see that the green sentences they indicate a violation. So URI says by reading these sentences or by analyzing these sentences, he thinks or she thinks, I'm not sure about the gender of URI, or it thinks that it will be a violation. And it's the same with the red one, but then URI thinks that it will be a non-violation. So of course, then we need our own disciplinary perspective. So for me, in my legal perspective, and see whether this makes any sense. And to me, in many cases, this doesn't make any sense. I cannot see why this specific or this specific sentence is a good predictor for non-violation, and this specific sentence isn't a good predictor for violation. Still, what's interesting is that we had this accuracy of 72%, and that there is something going on with these sentences. So I just wanted to show that a lot is possible with these new machine learning techniques, that we can also look on traditional housing law data, such as judgment, but you can also use other type of data to analyze this and automatically classify it and then find the classifiers. So if you want to know more about this project, please contact me. I'm here all seminar, and I will be there in Nicosia, hopefully live on the island, and enjoy the sun, and we can have a drink and discuss this project. But if you want to know more now, you can check the website. It's a very basic website yet. In 2 months' time, there will be a very fancy website with all kind of interaction and animations and stuff like that. But now you can find some more information about the project and about the techniques we use. But you can also send me an email, and I'm most happy to answer your question and see whether we can work together. So that's all I wanted to discuss today. Rosa and I agreed that everybody should have a very short period of time for their presentation, because it's exhausting to look on your screen for 3 days or for 3 hours. So we have 12 speakers. So I would like to give the floor back to Rosa and chair us to this section. And thanks so much for your attention.
Thanks, Professor, and congratulations for the project. I forgot to say that if you want, you can write down your questions in the chat during the presentations, and then we have time for discussion. Okay, share my screen. One moment. You can see now the screen, no?
Yes, we do.
Thanks. Okay. My presentation in particular deals with the use of a new technology, blockchain, as a tool to improve peer-to-peer direct housing transactions between parties. In particular, last reports show or market needs show that new generations are less adapted to paperwork when buying or even renting a home. They prefer the use of platforms to both look for a new home and to conclude the transaction. But the fact is that, especially for buying a home, several steps require to be done face-to-face nowadays. And apart from these new generation trends, COVID crisis showed that we need at least an online process for buying a house, especially important when there are mobility restrictions, for example, now, no? And that's why some countries, such as Spain, propose even during these months to allow online services of notaries and registers. So there's two factors, the COVID crisis and the aversion of new generations to paperwork increased during this time scholars and government attention to promote peer-to-peer networks and online proceedings to buy or rent a house. And a technology that can be used to do it is in fact blockchain. Blockchain was created more than 10 years ago to allow Bitcoin payments. But the scholars started considering that this technology could be used to transfer ownership or even other rights over real estate, such as an usufruct, a surface right, etc. Why? Because blockchain is like a digital book where transactions are recorded, but without being controlled by anyone. All the transactions are approved by all the connected computers, and it is almost impossible to hack it or to change this book unlawfully. So this technology achieves trust between parties without the need of having a central authority that provides trust. In addition, this database blockchain allows the automatization of transactions, especially through smart contracts, which are computer codes that can be executed. And parties may create also the so-called tokens. Tokens are digital assets, such as a cryptocurrency, but parties may decide what this token represents. For example, we can create a token representing the ownership of a house or a loan or a rental contract, etc. What is the benefit of using blockchain for these purposes? Well, there are several. First, that parties might transfer this token immediately with reduced fees, quite cheap. With the transfer of this token, they intend also to transfer the right that it represents. Second, this transaction is publicly recorded so that anyone can check who has a certain token. And in some slides, I will show you, for example, how can you check, let's say, the wallet that has a certain token. We can track it. And there are other benefits. For example, no one can hack this blockchain or steal the token. And in the future, we may even connect this database with public authorities. So at the UNESCO Housing Chair, we finished a research project on the validity of these transactions. And we studied what would happen if two private parties decide to sell a house just using blockchain. Here, you might see an example of how a token, in my wallet looks like. You can see here some information about the direction, the cadastral reference, etc. And I can just click here and sell it. Or here, another example. This is a token of a house. I can just click sell it and then select the account, the wallet, that I want to transfer the token. So what I want is to transfer also, for example, the ownership of this house. So the thing is, could this sale be valid nowadays? After analyzing 5 countries, we saw that this transaction would be valid in countries such as Spain, Italy, and France. This is because these countries do not require nowadays certain formalities for selling one's housing. The sale is valid even if no notarial land registry is involved. However, for example, in Spain, as following the so-called title and model system, the delivery of the housing is also required. So the buyer, apart from acquiring the token, would require to take the effective possession of the thing, for example, going there to live, or having its key. However, in other countries, such as in Germany and Netherlands, a public deed formalizing the sale and the registration in the land registry is also required. So nowadays, the sale of the housing located in these countries would not be valid through this token, as I showed you. Parties would require also the formal requirements after it. Some scholars have doubts, of course, that of the use of this blockchain technology, even in countries where it is possible to use it, considering that selling a house through this technology may reduce the current protection that intermediaries give to parties. It is true that blockchain by itself, since being a database, cannot, for example, explain the contract to the parties. That's why we try to summarize the main problems regarding the application of blockchain for housing transactions and look for possible solutions so that people that decide to follow this method is still somehow protected. In this table, you may see some of the limitations to be addressed. We concluded that the majority of these problems could be addressed if states have enough interest to do so, recognizing or certifying some blockchains that can be used to buy and sell properties. Some of the examples, very fast because of the time. For example, scholars pointed out that blockchain is essentially anonymous, which can promote money laundering as it is happening in Bitcoin transactions. But this can be also solved linking this blockchain to an official ID. In fact, the ESBI project of the European Commission is developing an ID, an online ID based on blockchain to interconnect European administrations or for the notarization of documents. So this could be used for housing transactions too. Also, some scholars mentioned that in preventive justice systems, the civil law notary controls unfair terms, for example, or the content of the contract. And on the contrary, when using a blockchain, nobody controls this content. In this sense, we propose a method. One, we have to take into account that smart contracts and certain tokens allow parties to write terms in human language so that they can write the contents of the contract. And then we could attach to this blockchain an artificial intelligence system comparing terms with unfair terms. This program could work as an oracle, as a validator of the transaction, so that the contract does not execute if any unfair term is detected. And another problem, for mentioning one more, would be, for example, ensuring that a certain person is the true owner of the property. If I create a token for a housing that is not mine, for example, the token that I showed you before, it's not my house. I invented it. Of course, that may affect the rights of other citizens. Here, a possible solution would be one, for example, to register the token address, the token reference to a registry, so that we can check any wallet that has this token and nobody is affected for selling the house unfair. Or another possible option would be the creation of a housing digital ID by the government, for example, by the competent authority, so that anybody can check that the wallet that has this token is the one that theoretically is the owner. For example, here you might see how we can track a token. Here, this is an example of all the wallets that had this token and the exact date where they were transferred. So this would be an option. Of course, due to the short time, we cannot explain more details, but if you want to read more about it, you can check our publications. They are all open access in the Housing Chair's website in this link. And this was just an overview. Thank you very much. And Now we have some minutes, I think, Michelle, no, for questions, if you have any.
Yeah, so there's already a live debate in the chat section. So where people ask me some questions about like my project and stuff like that. So if people are interested in asking questions to Rosa, they can just do that right now, but they can maybe also do it in the chat. That saves time, and then Rosa can just answer them later. During the other presentations. Of course, it's a disadvantage because you cannot follow the other presentations, but I think it's best to just maybe continue with the next presentation because we're already behind time. So plus, if someone wants to ask a question to Rosa, feel free to do now or do it in the chat. Is there anyone? Please raise your hand. Not yet, so maybe later in the chat. Rosa, I would like to congratulate you with your work because it's very interesting. Thanks so much.
A short question.
Yeah, Christoph.
A short question. I mean, I'm a complete outsider to this brave new world of technology, of course. And I'm wondering, but how would you overcome the obstacle that I wouldn't buy a house on the internet before I've seen it, before I've been guided by an architect and did some checks and whatsoever. So what is the utility of the whole thing? I mean, put it in a straightforward way.
Well,
for the sale of houses. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So thanks, Professor, for your questions. What we saw during this COVID crisis is that they are implementing virtual visitings so that you can more or less check the house, check the state. Of course, if you want to buy your first residence, normally it's better to be informed, no, and not to just buy a house without visiting it. But we can think on these virtual visiting methods so that you can check videos, for example, or even if you are a person who is in another country, you can send an architect or a real estate agent to check that everything is working. And if not, it can also work after visiting the house to accelerate all the process. So for example, imagine that we have the advertisement of this house. I go there, I check everything, I check possible searches, possible mortgages, etc. And then we decide to do all the process fastly to sell it through this token. That would be also possible, overcoming the fact that you are not visiting the house. Thanks. So maybe we can continue with the workshop with the suggestion of Professor Falls. Now it is time to hear the research from our colleagues. The first panel is entitled Data Methods and Digital Rights. Each speaker will have approximately 8 minutes, and then we will have some time for discussion. But of course, during the session, you can write down your questions and maybe speakers can also answer them. So let me check the program. One moment. I lose the folder.
So I think the next speaker is Asemina, yeah. Dr. Asemina Salpaturu. Sorry for mispronouncing your name, Asemina. Very Salpaturu. International audience. So you will talk about, you can find the program then in meanwhile, Rosa, about predictive justice and housing right through big data extraction. So I'm interested in that. So what you're going to tell. Floor is yours.
So thank you very much. I'm really glad to see you again through this webinar, which is quite fascinating for me. I'll present my under construction researches. I'm not as advanced as you do, but it's been a while that I'm reading and researching and thinking. So there are a lot of things that are happening in France, and it's quite fascinating. So my topic today was mostly about predictive justice as a form or as a kind of cyber justice in some way, where we quantify or have an actuarial point of view of justice in order to use through the use of mathematical probabilities and quantification of risks. So it's like a fascinating combination of mathematical probabilities and justice, the real process of justice, actually. As far as I'm concerned, this was I was really fascinated from this topic for two reasons related to evolutions and of this kind of concepts and the implementation mostly in France, but generally with a regard to European law. And there is 2 points that really find fascinating. Firstly, this kind of, Professor Volz talked about that, this massive access to jurisdictional data and their processing in order to give some results. And from the other hand, this increasing literature, legal literature or general literature, and the legal framework related to this subject and more sensitive in some way when it comes to human rights and housing rights, especially, which interests us more. So what was, firstly, just in a general way, it's this issue, the predictive justice or artificial intelligence and data technologies, is not a new issue, actually. It's not a new topic. In France, actually, since the 60s, we talk about predictive justice, and there are a lot of legal texts, platforms where we can explore big data in law that exist very widely in France and used by lawyers and researchers, etc., etc. What it has changed and make the thing more fascinating is that up to the 90s, the point of view about artificial intelligence was like as simple as that. We have the data and the rules, and we use them to have some results. Since the 90s, this kind of articulation has changed in 2 ways. Firstly, we can no longer compare the whole and the part of the whole when we talk about big data. So the quantification of cases and data becomes very relative. And secondly, before we had, as I said, data and rules to have results. Today we have data and results. We process them, and they give us rules which can be applicable to give more results when more data processing. It's what Professor Volz explained as the way to get of the algorithms to get more intelligent when they come to be used and take more data and process more data. And this changes a lot of the way of thinking and brings new challenges because of this large scale of use of information and of the specific use of housing rights and human rights. Because there are 2 points. Obviously, there is a lot of there is an interest in using all these algorithms and artificial intelligence in justice in order to have faster and more reliable results. The point is that, of course, there is a chance to explore and use and have better results. But there are a lot of limits related to mostly to, firstly, human rights in generally, because, of course, algorithms, they lack of the human or social factor. And then the way that algorithms improve through their proper way, and they cannot be controlled by like normal processes. For example, in a business, when I run a business in my way, there can be controls, and the company can come to my place and check my finances and the way I process. This cannot happen with algorithms. So it's quite complicated to check if algorithms are functioning well, are taking into account the state cases that already exist, and in which way they can make them improve. And the main challenge in that way is to reproduce the wrong decision, the wrong state cases, if I can characterize them like that, in the future, and so give us discriminatory results, because the state cases are produced by judges, and judges can be wrong, and they can take into consideration some information that are not so respectful in human rights and equality, and algorithms risk to use this position of the judge and make it last and reproduced in the future. When it comes to housing rights, this is in French law. There is some evolution, some new quite a legal framework that is in construction actually. Firstly, in 2016, there is a big effort with the law called Digital Republic. Maybe you've heard of that, and which introduced a simple rule: the transparency of public algorithms. So firstly, the French legislator understood that has to do something with this use of algorithms, which was already very used by professionals in an informal way. So if we come to create public algorithms in justice, but we need to have some guarantees. And firstly, this has been transparency in French law in 2016. So in the second time, we are here. We have an act of 2019. It's been almost 2 years now, which laid foundation in order to create an institutional predictive justice, especially by creating, firstly, merging different types of courts, and then judicial claims, and promoting mostly the materialization of justice by giving the permission to publish court decision. In 2 words, since 2 years now, all type of judicial decisions, yes, can be and have to be published in French law. And in the beginning of the lockdown, and which was quite a funny news, maybe a big path to the future, there has been a decree in France which introduces the automatic processing of personal data through the creation of a special platform called adressed. So now the Minister of Justice has the possibility or the duty to collect all court judgments since 2017 and use them in order to predict the future court decisions in a special subject, which is the personal extra patrimonial injuries. It's very specific today, but it's just for the experimentation. But tomorrow, if this experimentation of adressed works, there will be a second decree, and then a generalization of the use of this kind of platforms. So just to conclude quite fastly, all these new, but not that new practices, and all this new legal framework related also to the European law. There is a white paper of the European Commission last year, or the European Ethical Charter of use of artificial intelligence. It's been 2 years in the Council of Europe. So all this legal framework, when it meets housing rights, can have some limits for many reasons. They are not all proper to French law or the French reality, but some of them, yes. So firstly, as discussed, and sorry, I repeat that, but firstly, there is this fundamental rights issue about housing rights, but not also this one, but housing rights combine this fundamental rights quality and this business activity quality. There's a double way to treat, for a judge to treat housing rights. So the human factor of the presence of judge and the possibility of people to go to the court and argue their situation and their case is very important, because it's not always easy to distinguish both of them. Moreover, we can observe in France a kind of I read the question. I'll answer you afterwards. So I just finished my topic. So I want to say that this double nature of housing rights, but also this tendency of the judge to find an equilibrium. A way to combine actually property rights and housing rights can be disadvantaging to people, and especially to tenants, which are, we all know, they're not the strong part of a leasing of a contract. And then to conclude, there are this homelessness problem in France, which is very strong in the national level and much stronger in big cities. Actually, we have Paris, we have Marseille, we have Lille, which gives us a very important amount of judicial disputes. As an example, last 3 years we have 154,000 of judicial disputes related to just eviction, not to mention all the problems of inadequate housing and stuff. So the amount of data in this case law related to housing rights in a general way, about eviction, about quality of housing, it's very huge and very diversified, depending to the city, depending to the people, depending to the economic and social context. Because France, you have you have big cities like Paris, which is one of the richest cities of France, even the richest, but where we find the more disadvantaged and poor people in France. So this kind of context, they are quite difficult and challenging for algorithms to deal with, and this is quite a challenge for the future. And I see my time is quite past, so I'll stop here today. Thank you very much. I saw firstly some questions, mostly about the numbers of the decisions that are processed today. The decree is very recent. The decree which asked to the minister to collect all the decisions. It's like last May. So we don't have yet the numbers. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Asimina, for your presentation. Of course, we can discuss it through the chat, or afterwards, after the 3 presenters that remain, we can make the discussion. So now it's the turn of Dr. Dorit Garfunkel and Professor Rachele Alterman from the Technion Israel Institute of Technology. They will present about the role of technologies in shaping high-rise condominium governance.
Dorit alone will be presenting. She is a PhD student, but this particular topic, the problem of privacy in condominiums, is beyond the PhD, and she's all on her own and her own accomplishments.
Dorit, I think that you have the microphone. Okay.
Yeah, hi. And can I upload a presentation, or how do I upload a presentation?
We can see it.
Oh, you can see it, but I can't. Okay.
Can you? Oh, hold on, maybe.
You can see my presentation. Can you see my presentation, or?
Not now, but
No,
we
I need
were
share
seeing
screen.
it.
Sorry, I had it.
Now you can see it?
Now,
No.
yes.
Yes, now.
Okay, okay. So I'm going to take you to another direction from what we've heard so far. Thank you very much. It was really, really fascinating, the lecture so far, and I'm happy I can be here. I wasn't sure I could make it. And I want to speak today about the roles of technologies in a high-rise condominium towers, residential. I'm specifically interested in how people are governed by these new technologies, a variety of technologies, and specifically in the context of towers, of high-rise buildings, residential buildings that are regulated under condominium tenure, and combine the verticality, technologies, and new social relations. And when we think about issues of governance, we're so far mostly heard about smart cities and the public realm, and I'm more interested in the private area or private regime of condominiums, which is a different governance type. And we see that these high-rise condominiums, residential condominiums, are becoming a new form of vertical neighborhoods. They combine very large-scale communities. They combine often recreational amenities, new technologies, professional government, and new interfaces with the city. And when I'm speaking about condominiums, I'm sure you all you're all familiar with the term. I'm talking about property tenure in buildings that combine private ownership in private units, common ownership in common elements, and a governing mechanism of which is common to all owners. And as the scale of these buildings are becoming much bigger, the issues and problems are also becoming much broader. And we see that these buildings are highly dependent on technologies. And together with that, we see that no longer we hear about maintenance or management of condominiums as we used to, referring more to the mundane kind of things of cleaning these buildings or maybe neighbors' disputes. But we are really talking about the governance of these new socio-legal structures. There's one book by Randy Lippert that discussed this, is very nice, and he points to the assemblage of the condominium that combines many parties and stakeholders and tools and practices that turn condominiums into governance, actually. And he talks about the role of the elevator as a dominant technology, which is part of the governing technologies. But when I'm going to talk about technologies, I'm going to talk about many new other technologies beyond the elevator. I started my research examining cameras, closed circle cameras in residential buildings. And I was surprised to see that most discussions are talking about camera, mostly in the discussion about security, exclusion, gatedness of housing, and not so much looking about additional aspects of what cameras can be do to the private regime. So based on a qualitative analysis in Israel and analysis of juridical decision, I examined what is going on with the cameras. What are they used for, and what are the standpoints regarding the use of cameras in the private regime of condominiums? And I found that in practice, cameras are barely used for protection from external threats or for segregation, but mostly they are used for inner discipline and control of the inner behavior and use of the common elements of the property. They were justified usually by the value of the property that has to be remained, a little bit by the need to be protected, mostly from the fellow neighbors, and not so much from an outside threat, but more often not knowing, as you can see here, not knowing who are the other neighbors that we need to live with, that should be protected from. And mostly it was said that because they are not discriminative, but all owners and residents can be recorded equally, they are fine. And because we have no other limitation, hardly any legal reference in condominium laws, and in Israel also not in the privacy law, about the location of cameras in the private realm in housing, or other privacy by design limitations. There were actually condominiums with hundreds of cameras that were installed all over the place, from the underground car park to the garbage systems to follow if anyone is misusing them. And this case of cameras, it very much illuminated all the complexities, the new complexities that arise. We're starting to look about privacy and security and surveillance in the private regime. Not only issues of self-determination and the issues of control in a framework that is by definition subjected to the condominium mechanism, but also a new form of organizing the relation of the community of the individual inside the house, and undermining the ability to cooperate and to enjoy the benefits that were at least potentially can come with condominium governance. And we see that we saw that the involvement of managing agents and the problem of the principal agent problem actually fortified the use of these cameras to discipline inside the condominium and to create an hierarchical mode of governance. And I try to examine this and to explain it. How it happened, and I realized that it has both bottom-up and top-down logic that leads to this kind of practices. So my time is short, so I wouldn't take much. But from the bottom-up, I could really see how the close proximity between the people are raising new threats, and I implemented the unhomely theoretical framework, and you can read it. It will be published soon. But I will jump to the top-down logic, which brings us back to the issue of governance. Is the way that the use of these new mechanisms and new technologies are used in changing justification. So from the security point of view, we see how the security is used together with lifestyle benefits and lifestyle justification that even further reinforce the role of technology in collecting data and in supervising on what is going on, and operated by mostly managing companies. Raising many more issues beyond the issues that were just the problems that came with cameras. And it seemed that oh, I'm sorry, just 1 minute. I'm just saying I haven't missed out anything. And we see that that currently, it seems that the market and many startup companies and new products are designing more hardware and software to imply all kind of devices that actually tie together residential apps with on-demand services directed to the individual and to community life, together with the facility and personnel management, in the name of enhancing life experience. And this, of course, is raising new questions about the privacy and the ability and the structure and governance inside the condominiums. Because of this assemblage of one-stop technology that can provide managing companies mostly, or other real estate agents, the ability to control this facility that is private. And because it is private, it is hardly subjected to any accountability, transparency, ethical standard that could limit it. And my next step will be to actually examine these various machines and various apps, and then to try and develop a policy and legal framework for condominium governance that could allow the benefits of these systems, of course, but also without violating privacy and other expectation in perspective of this governance. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dori, for your presentation. Now we have the presentation of Andrea and Lian Dios from the Santiago de Compostela University. They will present on regional time for Professor Alba Nogueira from the Santiago de Compostela University, who will talk about the, sorry, I have issues today with my with my mouse. Okay, about the digital vulnerability in administrative housing procedures.
Okay, hello. I think there's some problem with my oh, I know. I had a paper over the camera. Okay, hello. Good afternoon. Thanks, Rosa, and thanks, Michelle Bosch, for organizing this meeting. I'm really pleased to see you again. And I'm going to present the results of a paper I'm writing on digital vulnerability that is like a follow-up of another paper I already presented in some meetings of the network in Athens before about administrative vulnerability in housing and housing rights. I think most of you know that in Spain in the past few years, regional governments have pushed forward reforms on housing rights. There has been quite a hectic activism in the legal domain of the regional autonomous communities to promote housing rights. However, in the first moment, the central government and also the constitutional court kind of stopped those movements. In the recent times, it seems that there is quite the situation is more or less the same in the regional and the central government in order to push housing rights. However, we think, maybe those legal changes are not enough, and some administrative practice might frustrate the strive to protect housing rights. The point of this paper is that it's a follow-up of the previous paper or two previous papers on administrative vulnerability, is that there is a procedural dimension of social rights, and maybe legal recognition of housing rights is not enough if procedures are not changed to remove the obstacle vulnerable people especially have when dealing with the administration. In Spain, there is very little social housing, so most of the housing benefits are aids, are public aids to people, to vulnerable people, or procedures, administrative procedures to receive money from the public administrations. And we have studied how those procedures are adapted for vulnerable people. We have found out that we have procedure obstacles, time constraints, procedures are very lengthy. We have requirements like residence requirements that limit access for vulnerable people, for like migrants, for example. We have rent limits that in big cities make that vulnerable groups have very difficult access to those public aids, or budget limitations, for example. But now I think one of the most important dimensions of that administrative vulnerability is digital vulnerability. We think there are two kinds of problems. On one side, there is an increasing digitalization of administrative procedures, and those procedures aren't meant or aren't thought for people with a digital divide. For example, women, elderly people, poor people who are less likely to have skills and means to interact through electronic means. And on the other side, there's another problem, and we have seen it in the Netherlands in the past few months, there is an increasing use by the administration of automatic decisions. And those decisions have algorithms, sometimes have bias, and it's what has been called the poverty of automatization. And also in the context, we have to appreciate another thing that I think is quite important is the COVID-19 impact. The boost of digitalization of administrative procedures with a very limited face-to-face attention has an special impact on those vulnerable groups, and that's why we are calling this vulnerability, this digital vulnerability in housing procedures. We have there some examples translated into English of problems in different social rights in the past few months, where we don't have a problem of recognition of the rights, but a problem of access to those rights because of failures in the administrative procedures. People who don't get to even apply for those benefits, or people who have to who get their applications denied because of a very slow administration. And on the other side, we have that legal provisions provide that digital interaction is a right, not an obligation, especially for those groups with less economic power or with more social problems. That's what is provided in our Procedure Act. But we have seen how COVID has changed everything, and what in legal terms would not be an obligation, it has become an obligation. This is an example. This is the last piece of the last regional procedure for housing benefits in the Canary Islands. Is a January procedure, and you can see in there that there is a preference for electronic application. It's a procedure for vulnerable groups. There is a need of a digital certificate to apply. Face-to-face interaction is not preference. Instead, an appointment request is needed to be helped by the digital supporting desk. And if you don't have a digital signature, there is still a need to fill in the form in a digital way. So we can see in a very small piece of a regional procedure how many digital requirements are needed for people that not necessarily have the skills and the competences to do so. Some regional housing acts, some of those new regional housing acts have provisions, and also some regional procedures have provisions to help people with difficulties to interact digitally with administration. That is the case of those that you have there, one of Euskadi and one of Valencia, where in one case, non-governmental organizations can help those people, and the other case there is a support desk to help people who are not digitally skilled. And also some acts provide for support services to help with those with that administrative vulnerability. In any case, you have to take into account the context is that there have been severe cuts in social policies and personnel, so most of that information support was given by local municipalities, and local workers are 10% less than before the economic crisis at this moment. We don't think the remedy is a judicial one, because we know that vulnerable people can't wait for help. So remedies have to be of another types. So, and that's the thing, I'm going to skip this one because we are running out of time. We think providing to a right to a good digital administration, as is expected and stated in the draft Spanish Charter of Digital Rights, could help to think things over and to rethink procedures and to simplify procedures for vulnerable groups. And also we need to increase digital knowledge, to have administrative service to help people with especially vulnerable people. And there are some autonomous communities that are showing us the way with more friendly procedures, with social services help, with the simplification of requirements. And I think this is quite very much needed, especially in these COVID times that are increasing non-presence relations with administration. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nogueira, for your presentation. In fact, it is a quite important issue because we are here discussing about using new technologies with registries, with other administrations, between parties, but we should take into account also the people who is vulnerable and doesn't have this knowledge to access to these technologies. So now we have a short time for questions. There was an intense debate in the chat, so almost all the questions were addressed, I think, but maybe there's a pending question from, I think it was addressed to Asimina from Michel, right?
Yes, so there was a lively chat already or a lively debate in the chat. So I would recommend everybody to just check the chat if you haven't done so. I asked a question to Asemina. I'm not sure whether she answered, but she can also answer in the chat, so we don't lose that much time because it was a very factual question, right? But there are many suggestions of people in the chat about literature, colleagues to contact, good ideas, perspectives. So I think that's fine.
Okay.
Maybe we can have a 10-minute break right now to just get a coffee, some water. Maybe if people want to smoke, they should quit. But if they cannot quit in the meanwhile, they can have a smoke right now.
Yeah, I agree. We can have a 10 minutes break. If there's someone interested in discussing, we can also talk now. But if not, we can do the break and we meet at 5:40.
Yeah, but I think Rachel Alterman.
This is the American president inauguration right now.
Ah, okay. Okay, so we should all celebrate probably. So Thanks so much for letting us know, Rachel. So let's have a break then. So when do we return, Rosa?
10 minutes.
In 10 minutes. So pause. So in 10 minutes. So okay, see you in 10 minutes.
See you now.
So, great, everybody. Great that everybody is back. So welcome in this second session of this summer. I really enjoyed so far. I think it's a very productive and interdisciplinary talk. Again, please have a look in the chat. There are many suggestions, and just ask the questions in the chat. In the second session that I will chair, we have 3 speakers because Professor Ploeger from Delft couldn't make it because of busy other things he needed to do. He apologized and said that he will join next time. But that's okay because we're already running a bit out of time, so we will hopefully finish before 7 then, or finish strict at 7. So the first speaker, that's Professor Dr. Esther Moniz Espada from the University of Valladolid in Spain, and she will talk about interconnected smart cities. Professor Moniz Espada, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Michelle Bowles and Rosa Maria to have the opportunity to participate in this event. My speech will be short because only I would like to explain that when I speak about interconnected smart city, it's necessary to have to take account the idea of it's not possible to speak only this, the smart cities connected, that is necessary to speak about the opportunity of the rural areas in this subject. It's said that smart cities are synonymous with sustainable cities. One of the main challenges of the smart city is to achieve efficiency in the use of all its available resources and make this control of resources possible from any smart device. In order to ensure that a city has technological mobility at all levels, citizens must have access to a smart device with which to interact and contribute to the use efficient resources. It's said that half of the technology area of Vector ITC group. Following this idea, I would like to stand out how the interrelation in cities can be improved by taking advantage of the synergies between urban and rural areas. It must also be taken into consideration that the COVID pandemic has returned a new revitalization of rural areas. Globalization has so profoundly changed the relationships that unite the countryside with the city that academics have been forced to revise their views on this relationship. For about 2 decades, several studies have been carried out on relationships between rural and urban areas, and many papers have been written on this topic. But we are far from having achieved satisfactory comprehensive explanation. The effort continues, although sometimes we may have the feeling that the speed and complexity of these changes are overwhelming us. The European Green Deal 2020, please, next, thank you very much. The European Green Deal 2020 could be a new instrument or a new tool to respond to these challenges. It's a new growth strategy that aims to transform the EU into a fair and prosperous society with a modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy where there are no net emissions on greenhouse gases in 2050 and where economy grounds is decoupled from resources use. It also aims to protect, the next slide please, It also aims to protect, conserve, and enhance the EU natural capital, and protect the health and well-being of citizens from environment-related risks and impact. At the same time, this transition must be fair and inclusive. It must put people first and pay attention to regions, industry, and workers who will face the greatest challenges. The EU has the collective ability to transform its economy and society to put it on a more sustainable path. It can build on its strength as a global leader on climate, environmental measures, consumer protection, and workers' rights. The Green Deal is an integral part of this Commission strategy to implement the United Nations 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. To deliver the European Green Deal, there is a need to rethink policies for clean energy supply across the economy, industry, production, and consumption, large-scale infrastructure, transport, food and agriculture, construction, housing, taxation, and social benefits. To achieve this aim, it's essential to increase the value given to protecting and restoring natural ecosystems, to the sustainable use of resources, and to improving human health. This is where transformational change is most needed and potentially most beneficial for the EU economy, society, and natural environment. The EU, the European Union, should also promote and invest in the necessary digital transformation and tools as they are essential enablers of the change. While all of these areas for action are strongly interlinked and mutually reinforcing, carefully attention will have to be paid when there are potential trade-offs between economic, environmental, and social objectives. The Biodiversity Strategy 2030 will also include proposals to green European cities and increase biodiversity in urban spaces. The European Commission, will consider drafting a nature restoring plan and will look at how to provide funding to help member states to reach this aim. Infrastructure will be made fit to support new sustainable mobility services that can reduce congestion and pollution, especially in urban areas. The urban dimension of cohesion policy will be strengthening, and the proposed European Urban Initiative will provide assistance to cities to help them make best use of opportunities to develop sustainable urban development strategies. The European Union Covenant of Mayors will continue to be a central force. The European Commission will work with it to continue to provide assistance to cities and regions that want to commit to the ambitious pledges on climate and energy policies. It will remain an essential platform to share good practices on how to implement change locally. But European funds include for rural development support too. Will help rural areas to harness opportunities in the circular and bioeconomy. The Commission will reflect this in its long-term vision for rural areas. It will pay particular attention to the role of outermost regions in the European Green Deal, taking into account their vulnerability to climate change and natural disasters, that their unique access to biodiversity and renewable energy sources. So we have to rethink of territorial cohesion with a new tool, so-called European Green Deal, aims to transform the EU economy for a sustainable future. And for this, it contains various policies that should carry out these transformative functions. The Commission has presented an initial roadmap of the key policies and measures needed to achieve the European Green Deal. It will be updated as needs evolve and the policy responses are formulated. All European Union action and policies will have to contribute to European Green Deal objectives. The challenges are complex and interlinked. The policies response must be bold and comprehensive and seek to maximize benefits for health, quality of life, resilience, and competitiveness. It will require intensive coordination. In that way, the document is a new instrument or new tool for the defense of the territorial cohesion, I mean, for the ruralization of urban areas and for the urbanization of rural areas. From now on, it should not talk about the use of space without taking into account a whole integral policy. To finish, we can say that advantage and risk may be distinguished in our premise. Urban centers have been greatly developed and to deal with environmental first, and then climate concern, new proposals and search to make them compatible with nature. Although many are poorly environmental and tend to greening the city, agricultural and rural topics is presented as a major factor to contribute to that aim. Some problems related to rural and agricultural, in particular food security, have given the opportunity to approach one sector to the other, I mean rural and urban areas, especially by urban or suburban agricultural and vertical farming projects. On the other hand, agriculture suffers from the development of urbanization, which contribute to destroy or reduce the useful agricultural area. At the same time, rural areas need infrastructures usually associated to urban centers. For these reasons, in the field of urban studies, it's necessary to incorporate and take into account agricultural and rural problems and concerns, aiming to conserve suburban farm and to avoid that urban farm projects don't disturb the perspective of all rural legislation. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for this interesting talk, Professor Muniz Espada. Looking forward to read more about your research. For now, if there's any question, please put them in the chat, and then we can discuss them later. For now, I would like to give the floor to the next presenter, which is a professor from Israel, Professor Dr. Shelley Kreitzer-Levi, from the College of Law and Business from Ramat Gan in Israel, as I said. So, Shelley, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll share my slides. So can you all see the slides? Good. Okay, so first I want to thank Rosa and Michelle for organizing this really great seminar. I'm going to present something really quite different from the previous presentations. I'm going to talk about robots in the home, and that is very early work in progress. So the modern house is filled with technological appliances, and so our physical environment is changing. Personal items are now connected to the internet or have artificial intelligence capabilities. A robot chef, a drone, toys, caretaker robots are some of the notable examples that change our home environment. Now, the problem as I see it legally is that personal property law is outdated, right? It is ill-suited for the technological era. So there are two aspects to this problem. The first aspect is limited ownership. So consumers, they buy the product, and according to traditional personal property law, they are its owners. But consumers only have a license to use the software, and the software determines the use and function of the product. So this leaves a great deal of control to manufacturers. And when I say manufacturers, I mean broadly defined. And so this limited ownership has been criticized from consumer protection, antitrust, even IP perspectives, but not from within property law. So this is one aspect, the limited ownership. Now, we cannot simply say, let's restore full ownership of the consumer. That's not possible. And that brings me to the second aspect, and that is that some level of continued collaboration between the consumer owner and the seller, manufacturer, designer, right? Some level of collaboration is necessary and it's even inevitable. Products require periodical updates to maintain their safety and quality, and manufacturers may need information collected by the product to improve and develop new products. Also, robots make autonomous decisions that cannot be entirely foreseen, but they can be fixed once an error or undesired outcome has occurred. So this is the problem, right? And now I'm working on a property model for the technological era, specifically starting with robots. Most of them, as I said, are changing our home environment. And I think that the importance of an updated property framework is that currently the rules governing this continued collaboration are sort of the rules that are stipulated by the standard contract that the user simply accepts upon buying the product, right? And so if we don't have a clear property model, manufacturing companies hold tremendous power to determine the scope of the collaboration and their prospective liabilities. And so I think that a property model can create some sort of standardization of the collaboration. So what would a property model look like? So as I see it, there are three elements of the collaboration that a property model has to address. So first, the model has to account for long-term collaboration in property between two actors that have very different roles and also unequal bargaining power. So that's one. The second element is that the collaboration creates two distinct property interests that are strong, but they're still incomplete and they fall short of full ownership. And then the third element, which I found especially important, is that the model requires a relational outlook that recognizes certain duties between the parties as per their collaboration. So what I propose is that we draw inspiration from European feudal property law. And this is very early work in progress, as I said, and I know it sounds unconventional, and it is, right? So typically people refer to feudal law to criticize the power of manufacturers and platforms, right? So what I want to do, I don't want to go and copy paste feudal law, but rather reimagine it and reclaim it so that we take away from it only the parts that advance our thinking about the topic and sort of step away from the model of complete ownership. And so there are two important aspects that I see may be beneficial to take from the idea of feudal property law. So the first is split ownership between the lord and the vassal, right? So between the lord and the vassal, we can think about the consumer and manufacturer. The second aspect is that ownership comes with a role, duties to one another. So the lord had a duty to protect the vassal, and the vassal had to aid the lord in war. So what this would mean, let's try to think what all of this would mean if we try to apply it to robots in the home. And this is very preliminary, but just to give you a rough idea. So both the manufacturer and the consumer share control over the robot. Consumers should be able to use the product and to alienate it, but they should owe a duty to allow access to certain information that contributes to the improvement of the product. The manufacturers should be responsible for certain aspects of the use and for its improvement, right? So this is a sort of a dynamic process, and they should have a right to use information required for maintaining the product and for future development, but still assure the personal privacy of the user. So this structure treats both parties as holding control over the robot and assigns a distinct role to each of them. Now, the goal here is that the model will help create the right rules that refer to the distribution of rights and liabilities between the parties, but do it from a private law perspective, not simply talk about regulation, though regulation may be important as well, right? And the purpose is to undermine the unequal bargaining power and create the right protection of users while assuring innovation. And I think that property law is an important tool that we sometimes miss, right? We don't use often enough and can be used to protect consumers because it determines the scope of the parties' negotiation and provides public standardization of the relationship. So I know this has been preliminary. I do welcome comments here and afterwards. If you want to write to me, I'll be very happy to continue to discuss these ideas with you. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Shelley. And as always, fascinating research. And it's very interesting to combine feudal law, such an ancient thing, with robotics, right? So that's a very interesting approach. And I'm pretty sure that some people will have thoughts about this this paper, because we have some great property scholars in the audience. So if they, I already see some things in the chat, but they can add things in the chat or send you an email, but probably there's some time to ask questions if people have questions. For now, thanks, Shelley, and I will continue to the next and last speaker of this session. That's Francesca Gennari from the University of Bologna in Italy. We have a very international audience. That's great. So Francesca, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you everyone, and good evening. There were some very thought-provoking intervention. I'm really happy to be at this kickoff seminar. I will try to share my screen just a second. Here it is. No. I have the same problem as before, so Professor Force, would you be so kind if it's not a problem to share my presentation? I will just tell you when to advance.
I will give it a try.
Thank you so much.
So do you now see your screen, or do you see it?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you very much. So before delving into the topic of my presentation, which will concern mostly some data protection aspects of the development of the Internet of Things technology inside the house, I will just briefly introduce myself. My name is Francesca, and I'm a Science and Technology PhD, which is funded from Marie Curie Sklodowska grant. Next, my presentation will be structured around three main conceptual assets. The first is the fact that actually the house is not the center of private life anymore, or at least its borders have become porous. And also we have to think about the fact that this has had an impact on how we see our relationship with the data we produce in the house, especially under data protection law. And then as a third point, we have also to understand that also due to the pandemic, the current IoT technology is rapidly changing and evolving, also because it has been hybridated with other cutting-edge technologies. In order to outline that, I will just focus for the moment on mainly EU data protection law, because it's the framework that I'm most familiar with, but also because of question of time. I will try to outline then, this is the second slide, I think, two operational concepts which are data proximity and data control, in order to explain a brief legal analysis of these new technologies which are changing and hybridating the Internet of Things. This will have three main objectives: to show that the relationship between law and technology is a mutual relationship, and that one influences another and vice versa, and that I argue that in the next future there will be a growing importance of the principles of privacy by design and by default, especially in constraining safer IoT home technology. And it's a very still early phase of my research, so I would not say that I have the results, but I will have findings. So the first part will concern mainly the house, which, as I told you, is not the center of private life anymore. Traditionally, constitutions allowed for specific exceptions for intrusion in the private home. But nowadays, as also Professor Kreitzer-Levy told, there are a lot of objects which are using a lot of inputs that we give them. They can be I don't know, for instance, our face image, our fingerprints, our vocal commands, and also the temperature we produce in a specific environment. This is how the Internet of Things works. So collecting a lot of inputs through sensors or actuators, then they are sent to a gateway and then sent to the cloud. Once these data are reaching the cloud, the person doesn't know what will happen with his or her own data. And that is problematic because some people have mentioned about unfair discrimination that can be drawn from data analytics and the collection of data. But also, I think that there were some scandals which, at least in the European Union, have made the people a bit wary of using technologies in the house. For instance, well, it's not really connected to the IoT, but the scandal of Cambridge Analytica was definitely one of the most important ones. But also some more recently, the use of Google Home and Alexa, which have been reported to listening to conversation of data of house inhabitants, even when they were supposed to be switched off. So what do consumers or data subjects and most importantly also stakeholders, manufacturers, want in order to build trustworthy technology? They want to have the data closer to them, so that's what I intend for data proximity, in order to exercise a more meaningful control over them. Next slide, please. This is also reflected at the EU level in substantive law and also, let's say, in soft law. The most important example of substantive law is the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. I think that the fact that personal data definition and also the processing definition are so large in order to capture most of the data that are also produced in the house. But there are a lot of points of friction and contrast because the IoT technology is from the late 90s and it was it's much older than the GDPR. And so, for instance, one of the problems is how to give a meaningful consent when we accept to use a certain object. That was mentioned by Professor Kreitzer-Levy. And also the remedies for the consumer and the data subject are really in a very experimental enforcement phase. Last week, I think Advocate General Bobek, in a preliminary opinion, stated that it is possible for a person who has suffered a data breach to bring legal proceeding to the seat, the EU seat, where the representative of be huge, because so far we do not have a IoT manufacturer industry at the EU level that can compete, for instance, with the American or Chinese one. Then, well, the soft law, I think it's important to mention that in the EU data strategy presented last year, von der Leyen Commissioner wants to create a European data cloud, and that has also the objective to bring data closer to European citizens. But I wonder if also we can achieve and enhance and make better IoT technology also with these new technologies that are being developed. And I think this is the case. Next slide, please. I will just outline the main technologies that I find interesting. This is the first one, the edge computing. It's based on the fact that the IoT model is a centralized model, which is based mostly on the importance of the data analytics operation that are made into the cloud, which is intangible and very far from home inhabitants or home user, what we can say nowadays. But the problem is that every year connected devices are increasing, and there can be a default of the structure of the cloud. And therefore, since a few years, technical engineers have been starting to increase the computational power of IoT objects. And in this way, you can record data at the edge of the system, maybe in the same device. And that would be beneficial also to correct some structural deficiencies of the IoT. Next slide, please. Then we have the tactile internet, which is a very interesting and very experimental technology. It is based on the use of our senses, tact and eyesight mostly, and haptic sensors that allow the people to reproduce movements or to accomplish acts in another place geographically and with a very low latency. Of course, there are a few applications now. There should be a performative 5G infrastructure to allow its full potentiality. I think that there can be problems as far as biometric data will be involved. But of course, I think that this technology can be very resourceful, especially for the area of creative content and entertainment, and why not rehabilitation from the house, especially in a pandemic. Next slide. And finally, I also took some technologies and their relationship with the IoT, because they are two totally different words. If the IoT is centralized, the distributed ledger technologies and blockchains in particular are founded on a decentralized model and a collaborative one. The advantages also already outlined by Rosa in her presentation are several by using blockchain, meaning that there is more transparency, and that can also allow people to know exactly when and how their data are used, and it can be incredibly useful as far as allocation of liability is concerned. But the problem with this technology is that it uses cryptographic techniques which are very heavy to process. So, but there are some experimentation in order to create some IoT protocols for DLT and blockchain adapted for the IoT. And this, I think that with edge computing can really help in creating a safer and more privacy compliant home Internet of Things. Next slide. So to summarize a little bit, my research is still in a very experimental phase, and it's early, but I'm trying to adopt an interdisciplinary methodology by focusing also on technology, with the limitation that I studied law and not informatics, so I try my best. But I think that the technological convergence is really going faster nowadays, and that if we can use this, I don't know if you heard about it about COVID, but this Swiss cheese model, meaning different technologies, because also the objects in the IoT house are different and have different functions. In order to extract the best data proximity and the data control values, I think that this will increase the how can I say, the trust that home inhabitants can have towards this new technology. And that's briefly what I wanted to say to you. I thank you for your attention, and I'm really eager to answer your questions. And you can see my email in the last slide, and I'm always reachable at that email address. Thank you so much. And thank you, Professor Vos, for sharing my screen very kindly.
Thank you so much. And you should thank Rosa for keeping up to date with all the slides. Well done, Francesca. It was a very interesting presentation. And I think there will be people, and I already see it in the chat, that are willing to help you during this early stage in your research. That was session 2. We still plan to finish at 7 because, or at least in the Netherlands at 7. Because then we had 3 hours of watching our screen, and I think that's enough. So I would like to give the chair thing to Rosa to guide us through the last session.
Thanks, Professor. Yes, last but not least, the last one session. Of course, if there's questions pending from the other one, you can answer it through the chat. And this last session is entitled Technologies to Design, Finance or Manage Our Homes. And the first speaker is Micaela Raposo from Portugal, who is going to present an interesting research on how to customize, how to design buildings or housing by the inhabitants. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, now we see it.
Okay. So I am an architect and PhD research student, and what I brought today is one analysis, and it's a literature review on systems that allow for housing customization. This is a part of my PhD research, which is about the customization of housing through participatory design using digital technologies. So, as I said, this is a literature review on systems that allow housing customization. One of the most common difficulties in architectural design is to accommodate the specific wishes and requirements of all end users in the design process of their homes. As stated by Lowe, Schnabel, and Hayden, providing house is just a start. Providing one that fits the individual needs of families is one of the next challenges. In this slide, enabling inhabitants to have control over their future house will assure this success and will democratize architecture for society as a whole, by letting society have a voice and play an active role in the development of housing industry. Architects have developed several concepts to enable houses to be customized by their inhabitants. Society has been taking part of design processes in cases as housing, educational facilities, and public spaces through participatory and co-design initiatives. The Patio, Put and Coma Housing Complex by Álvaro Siza and La Meme by Lucian Kroll are examples of such projects that end users have taken part of. Also, John Abraken have developed the open building concept, which is about the detachment of the interior of the building from its envelope, leaving the space flexible to generate a wide range of possibilities. Yona Friedman was another pioneer of concepts such as flexibility and empowering inhabitants to decide the interior of their own homes. One of his best-known works is the Villa Espacial. Standardization allowed the creation of mass housing in a relatively quick and low-cost manner. However, inhabitants have individual needs and that standardization cannot address. In this sense, the need for mass customization is evident, and it can be aided by generative design tools, which allows the generation of a large number of diversified solutions in an automated way. Parametric design is being used by renowned offices and MVRDV have developed a set of parametric design tools. Also, shape grammars can be used as analytical tools to generate new designs and also to generate transformations. And the ones I'm sharing here are just a few examples of that. Based on these generative technologies, there have been developed research solutions for housing customization. These ones are examples of research solutions, and there are also commercial and product-oriented systems for inhabitants to design their own living spaces. A set of systems for the customization of houses have been analyzed and categorized by their characteristics as generation process, target users, type of outcome, type of interaction with the system, and availability. Regarding the generation process, we analyzed if the system generates the design in one step, by steps, or generate in one step and allowed to refine it by steps. For the availability, we analyze if it's available for free under request or payment, is a prototype not available, or just not available at all as a computer system. For the type of interaction, we analyzed if it allows or not the direct manipulation of space, and if the process does start or not by defining the user preferences. For the users, it was analyzed if there were architects, client or inhabitant, or other stakeholders. And finally, the type of outcome are simplified plans, detailed plans, 3D model, detailed drawing, including sections and elevations, and lists. By crossing the data, we can identify which systems had certain characteristics. For example, which systems could generate the design in one step. And also realize that a specific system can contain more than one feature in the same category. In the case, for example, for the barcode housing system, which is in the category of users, it allows to be used both by architects, inhabitants, and also other stakeholders. This is an example of a collaborative system. So for the generation process, moving now to the results of the analysis, these are the systems that, from the ones who were analyzed, that allowed the generation in one step of the final design of a house, showing to the end user and omitting the stages of generation. These systems, these ones, generate housing designs, transformations, or existing designs for analytical purposes. This system generates the design step by step, allowing users to make decisions during the housing design generation. And there are some other systems that generate the design in one part and leave the other part to be generated or refined step by step. Regarding to the target users, some systems under analysis are, according to the authors, designed to be used by professionals. Other systems are targeted at the client himself, and there are also collaborative systems that allow the participation of different stakeholders and also the communication between multiple end users. For the type of outcome, these systems deliver at the end a simplified floor plan, which, for example, defines the functional areas of the house, but it does not give any construction information. These ones generate detailed floor plans with indication of walls, openings, and large-scale construction information. In addition to detailed drawings, some systems generate also 3D models that provide interior or aerial views, or even immersive virtual reality visualization. And there are also other systems that generate 2D drawings, 3D models that provide the different types of visualization, and also a list of building elements and budgets. For the type of interaction, in this category, we include all the systems that generate solutions based on the initial user requirements, and the users can change them to achieve different solutions. These ones allow the direct manipulation of space. Here are the other systems that the generation process does not start by defining the user preferences, and some of them also allow the direct manipulation of space. Regarding to the availability, these systems are online for free. These ones are commercial softwares available under request or payment. These ones are systems that have been implemented or partially implemented as prototypes. And there are also shape grammar systems that intended to generate housing designs, although they have not been implemented as computational systems. To conclude, we identified that most of the mentioned systems are important contributions for the mass customized design problem, but they are not available to the design sector, and therefore they cannot be used in real-life design scenarios. We can then conclude that there is still a lack of solutions that are cumulatively intuitive to be used by inhabitants, make it possible to generate a wide range of customized house designs, and comply with good architectural practices and construction regulations. Such possibility would democratize architecture, giving room for co-design and not moving away the architects from the design process. The next step in make these tools available is to include more architectural knowledge and user-friendly interfaces for non-professionals so that inhabitants can indeed take part of the housing design. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Micaela, for these interesting presentations and these tools that they might help to know beforehand how this new house will be, so that we can reduce for example, the building of houses that we don't like. Now it's the turn of our second speaker, Professor Pablo Amat from the Polytechnic University of Valencia. He will speak about financing real estate projects from mortgages to crowdfunding.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this really very interesting seminar. That gives me the opportunity to present a brief talk about crowdfunding in order to access credit for both consumers and companies in order to build new housing or to purchase their family house. We can conclude that the phenomenon of crowdfunding within a new modern system called collaborative economy is characterized by first of all, the direct participation of citizens without intermediaries in the production and distribution of goods and services, as well as the massive use of new communication and information technologies to organize and intervene in that new economic system. So, crowdfunding, above all, is a technology-based mass financing system managed through some specialized platforms and web pages. This system is aimed at raising funds from a multitude of contributors in order to carry out different and specific initiatives or projects. They can be business projects, consumer, cultural, educational, social, political, etc. We are really interested in the financial crowdfunding modality, where the profit is the basis of the transfer of funds made in favor of the promoter. In Spain, this is managed through a so-called participatory financing platform and is regulated by a modern law, Law 5 of 2015 of 27 of April on the promotion of business financing. So the participatory financing platforms are really some companies which need an administrative authorization to act in the market. their activity consists on putting in contact in a professional way, of course, through those web pages, a plurality of natural or legal persons who offer financing in exchange of a monetary return. These are called investors, with other natural legal persons called promoters who request this financing in their own name to be used for a participatory financing project. Within the law, the financial crowdfunding system it's contemplated two different sub-modalities. First, the equity crowdfunding, where the investor will become a partner of a capitalist commercial company, both anonymous or limited, which will carry out the real estate project. And the second submodality, the crowd lending, where the investor's contribution in favor of the promoter will generate a loan contract. There, the investor will be the lender, and the project developer will be the borrower. The financing must be used exclusively for a specific project of the promoter. It can only consist on a business or educational or consumer project. Therefore, based on this requirement of the law of 2015, the real estate sector, particularly housing and residential sector, can, in my opinion, access to this alternative financing system to fund, promote, and develop, finally, their projects. So, we can admit the possibility that a specific project proposed to these financing platforms by a promoter consumer can be financed to finally get a consumer product. For example, to build a new home or to even rehabilitate real estate for private use. We can now reach a first preliminary conclusion. There is no doubt, in my opinion, that the law of 2015 has opened a new financial channel to allow access to consumer credit. Now let me go to present briefly some preliminary conclusions in this area. It is interesting to consider the scope of the crowdfunding within the real estate sector, and specifically its possibilities as an authentic financing alternative for consumers or even companies in order to build their habitual home or to build real estate projects to be rented or to be sold to other people. But certainly when you read carefully the content of this law, first of all, the title of the new Spanish law that regulates this phenomenon does not let you think that the preferred objectives of crowdfunding is the one mentioned above. Certainly, it is entitled Promotion of Business Financing. It is committed, above all, to introduce certain improvements in back financing for small and medium-sized companies. And it does not seem to place the consumer in its central point of attention. There is enough evidence that let us consider that the participatory financing system is called upon to be developed above all within companies that act as promoters of projects rather than to facilitate the ordinary citizen or consumer a genuine alternative source of access to credit to purchase their home. So we think that probably the most of the projects that these financing technological platforms will admit on their web pages to obtain financing will be of a business nature, standing probably the consumer projects as residual. Let's see some reasons and conclusions that justify my thinking. On the one hand, the terminology used by the legislation seems to have a better fit in the professional or business world. Thus, if the law is talking about projects or promoters, for example, is that not seem really to fit the profile of a private citizen who wishes to buy his home as a final consumer? Secondly, in addition, the financing platforms have the obligation to verify the viability of each project, taking into account the best guarantees of return for investors, the potential of the project, and even examining, if possible, the solvency of the promoter. So, with these premises, we consider that in general terms, a consumer project consisting, I repeat, of the acquisition of a home by a private individual might not be very interesting for the financing platforms, nor for potential investors. Third, likewise, one of the two possible ways of crowdfunding, which are regulated in the Spanish law, I'm talking about equity crowdfunding, excludes directly the presentation of real estate projects by individuals. Thus, the modality of equity crowdfunding has nothing to do with consumers interested in purchasing housing. In fourth place, and on the other hand, the crowdfunding system, I think, is still a little bit unknown, not well known by the general public. And in addition, it involves a series of complexities that the average consumer may not be willing to assume. So, for instance, it involves a complexity for a non-expert consumer, which are the majority, to configure a project according to the legal requirements, which clearly can discourage the majority of citizens who might be interested in crowdfunding for housing purposes. 5. It cannot be forgotten that under Spanish legal and economic environment, the average citizen or families still are thinking habitually about mortgage bank financing when making a decision about the acquisition of their habitual home or residence. In fact, in this area, the recent Law 5 of 2019 about real estate credit contracts tries to clarify the main issues discussed in recent times between consumers and banks in order to provide greater legal security and protection to final consumer, which really is the weaker part of the contract. 6. However, to be a little bit optimistic, we do not see any overlap between the bank financing system through mortgage loans, which I insist continue to be the one mainly used by the average consumer for access to housing in Spain, at least, and the alternative system of crowdfunding. In fact, participatory financing platforms can, by law, cannot offer projects in which consumer request a mortgage loan. Finally, in order to make crowdfunding a truly alternative mechanism to mortgage bank credit in Spain, we think a relevant reform of the law of 2015 should be implemented. We consider it would be necessary to redirect the rules towards the consumer, if possible, as a natural person promoter who is interested in purchasing residential real estate for their own use and their family. Also, it will be necessary to make a significant effort on publicity and social promotion of this new and really complicated, sometimes financing system among the general public in order to achieve, first, its greater knowledge and comprehensibility, and second, its greater acceptability. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Amat, for the presentation. In fact, I had the opportunity to check the real estate crowdfunding projects in Spain, and all were focused on investment. So no projects for housing acquisition for consumers. And there was also issues, for example, with this Hausers platform, that they don't fulfill the payments, and that's a mass claim now against this platform. Yes. So now it's the turn of the third speaker, Rosalía Castro from La Laguna University in Spain, and she will speak about blockchain and land registry.
Okay, hi. Well, I'm trying to share my screen. Does it work or?
It works.
Okay. Well, I take this opportunity to thank Rosa and Michelle for the invitation, and of course to explore in this seminar my future research, because first I want to I'm going to talk a little bit about and loan and registry. The first thing I have to say is I have started recently with my doctoral thesis. So in fact, I'm going to talk about my future thesis and about what I'm going to investigate next years. And my doctoral thesis is about blockchain and Spanish land registry. So the first time I have heard talk about blockchain was closely linked to cryptocurrencies, of course, Bitcoin, and with the paper by Satoshi Nakamoto. But investigating a little more, I have found that since then, blockchain has been attracting an increasing interest in several files. And the first thing I have to learn is about what is blockchain. I don't want to extend too much because Rosa have explained very well, but blockchain basically is a set of technologies through which a certain number of users who are part of the same blockchain network can or will be able to transmit information from peer to peer and in a decentralized way. And in this way, it enables to eliminate intermediaries who store and manage information in a centralized way. So a blockchain network allows parties that don't trust each other to maintain a consensus of certain information, certain shared information. And it is this need of consensus for entry of new information, but also the key aspects such as encryptation, data encryptation or decentralization that make highly difficult and unlikely the mutability or corruption of the information that is hosted in different blocks of the blockchain. And that's why with these characteristics, blockchain becomes a tool that can be used not only in Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, but also in other fields, for example, in the cloud, in registers, in financial sector, or in sales, different sales. Because and the land registry, sorry, is not a stranger to it, because blockchain allows to sharing certain information in a decentralized way. So the adoption by a land registry is a case with a great adaptability, since, for example, an important function in the Spanish land registry is to give publicity to certain rights. However, how determine how can blockchain be adapted and implemented in a land registry needs to be studied and study the diverse legal reality of each of them. And as long as I'm aware, there is no country that has fully implemented a blockchain system in land registry, but some of them have already begun to experiment through pilot projects, for instance, Sweden or Georgia, Honduras, Brazil, Dubai, or Ghana. Nevertheless, each of them pursues different objectives, and related with that, I would like to present 3 use cases as an example. And the first one is Sweden. The Swedish land registry, the Lantmäteriet, is a very trust actor, and it's involved in all the process, but its absence in the earliest stages of the real estate transaction process reduced transparency, they think, and trust. So what they have done is develop a prototype to carry out the real estate transaction through a blockchain network from the moment of the sale agreement to the transfer of the proper ownership, all the process. And the expectation of this project, what they expect was to create a more secure, more efficient and reliable property transfer process, but not only, because also they wanted to reduce the time between the signing of the purchase agreement and the registration of the property title. In the second use case, I want to talk about Georgia. In Georgia, the project was promoted by the government, and they stated that the registry system had significant problems because of the high degree of distrust of its citizens in it, due to the corruption and the fraud that carried out in the past by workers when they illegally changed the records. So what they have done is a project for applying blockchain into phases. In a first phase, it was about applying blockchain to the existing system to provide it with immutability and invariability and all those characteristics that make highly difficult and unlikely the mutability or corruption of the information. But in a second phase, they wanted to extend the use of blockchain to other legal services that were related to real estate markets, such as a mortgage or notarial services, but also leases or sales. And what they expect with the use of blockchain in all this process was the government of Georgia decided to launch this project in order to combat corruption and promote the transparency using blockchain. And in the third use case that I want to talk is about Honduras. In Honduras, it's necessary to talk about that the Property Use Institute of Honduras was created after the transfer of registration powers from the judicial sphere to executive. So the institute lacks confidence, lacks trust in it due to the serious problems of corruption that surround the political system, since the registry gives into political pressure for those who hold the power in each moment. And that's why they said too that the vulnerability of the registry system generates important deficiencies in the protection of property, with ambiguity in the ownership of the domain, but in properties unregistered, or threat of illegal occupation, for example. And what they have done is build a pilot project to make the records related with the Property Institute and blockchain. And with its adoption, the expectation was that the immutability and auditability of that records would restore the confidence in the institution. So, as we can see, the purpose of adopting blockchain in these three cases were different, and is different depending on the conception, the purpose, and the reality of and intrinsic problems of each registry. And for that reason, to implement a blockchain, it's important to take into account that the casuistry of each registry and the purpose of adoption must be explored. Therefore, our research is aimed to explore how blockchain can be implemented in the Spanish land registry. In a preliminary way, we have started working with the hypothesis that adopting blockchain in the Spanish land registry can lead to multiple benefits for the quality of the services that provides, without damage to legal security. For example, we thought about services such as share certain information with the users, or interconnection, different nodes, such as each land registry in different cities, and interconnection through a blockchain can be interesting benefits. So to do this, we have asked ourselves some questions that we intend to answer in this research. The first one is, for example, under what condition could blockchain be applied in Spanish land registry? Or also, what kind of problems could be solved, or what advantages would it bring? Also, what are the legal difficulties that it creates, of course, and what challenges must it face so that the legal security of the institution is not harmed? So with this, I want to thank for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rosalia, for your presentation, and luck with your PhD. And now we have the last presentation by John Dean Marcunas from Power of Change Global Consultancy. He's going to present about climate change and blockchain, the implications on land, property, land tenure, and land governance.
Thank you, Rosa. Can you hear me and see me? That's my big question right now.
We can hear you, but I cannot see you.
I've unmuted my video. I'm on as a guest. I'm not sure.
If not with the voice.
I'm sorry?
No, if not with the voice, it's working too. That's the important thing.
All right, very good. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Rosa and her colleagues for the intense organization of this webinar, this event. Again, as mentioned, my name is John Dean Marcunas. I am a consultant with a little company I started 3-4 years ago called Power of Change Consultancy. We provide global, consultancy and services for startups and other entities in the real estate space. And our specialty, our focus is on global land registries, and which is why Rosalia's presentation was so interesting. And I'd like to say hello to Jacques Vos from the Netherlands, who is also a colleague and one of the experts in the European scene on land registry. So hello, Jacques. So I'm zooming in from New York. So good morning or good afternoon or good evening. I'm going to be talking about something which is my paper is based on, and it's something that isn't talked about a lot, but it should be. It isn't discussed at many international conferences or webinars or events, and it should be. And in my opinion, it isn't a priority with many governments, and I think it should be. And that is climate change and weather aberrations affecting land registration, and land administration. So over the next few minutes, I'll be talking a little bit about that, and then tease you with a little bit about how blockchain can help adopt and mitigate these climate changes. According to a 2018 UN climate report, the world has only about 12 years to reduce carbon emissions and avoid the worst impacts of climate change affecting most of our Earth's ecosphere. And these impacts are really affecting everything on land, sea, and air. It's affecting human health, livelihood, safety, society in general, and it's affecting especially developing countries, where those who suffer most from climate change have done the least to cause it. Climate change phenomena, as we know today, we know all this. It includes rising sea levels from melting sea caps, climate destabilization from extreme weather events, such as things that we may have experienced personally, like drought, flooding, mudslides, dust storms, and wildfires. Wildfires are occurring with really increasing frequency and intensity. Also contributing to climate disruption are human land invasions, which contributes to deforestation and land use changes. It increases fires, intentional fires, that is, increased cattle ranching, uncontrolled use of fertilizers, water poaching, and other nefarious activities, mostly illegal, some legal perhaps. So climate change, from my perspective, as it relates to land use, land administration, property ownership, zoning, construction, agriculture, and other sectors, they're all being affected. And these changes are bringing about risks we haven't considered before. And this will also affect the attitudes of global real estate investment by the private sector and influence financing policies, loan underwriting for home ownership, home improvements, and residential and commercial real estate development by both private and public institutions. So if we don't reduce carbon emissions by 2030, which goes back to the UN climate report, where I'm sitting right now in New York City, I'll be under 18 feet of water due to coastal flooding, which has been forecasted. So low-level scenario projections indicate that the frequency, depth, and extent of both high tide and more severe coastal flooding will increase rapidly in the next 10 years. And this is likely to destroy or make unsuitable for use billions of dollars worth of property by the middle of this century, by 2050, which is not too long away. Another interesting statistic is from the Global Humanitarian Forum Impact Report. That report estimates that climate disasters impact 375 million people each and every year. And that by 2050, climate change will have forced up to 50 million people to emigrate. Now, that's forced migration. That's our new refugee, the climate refugee. So, you're wondering how blockchain may fit in. I think that Rosalia gave a great description of what blockchain is. It's an immutable database and ledger, time-stamped information, transparent, you can't change it. I think that blockchain and artificial intelligence and IoT, the Internet of Things, and the cryptographic hashing and functions of that are perfectly suited to help us mitigate and adapt to physical climate risks, which affect land use, like I said, governance, land registration, and most important, tenure, property ownership. It will also affect financing and global real estate investment strategies. So I think that blockchain's impact will include two things that are really important, or one main thing, and that is data. Big data, important data, and the right data. Data aggregation, access to the data, and analysis of data brought through the blockchain channels by land registry offices and land administration officials who can create new policies and implement policies reflecting climate change and weather changes. And I think there are two data channels for this that blockchain will help aggregate and provide access to. The first data channel relates to climate data itself, geospatial data, climate change data from reports, research, and studies, and from satellites. The second channel of data, I think, which will dovetail and complement and help land registry officials, is land and property data itself. This data collected, better collected, more efficiently collected through blockchain, will improve land registration systems and administration and strengthen land tenure security, property ownership across the world, which in turn, this land tenure security, which in turn helps combat climate change, without a doubt. I think this is why it's so important to have very serious discussions on climate change issues in the ways they can be mitigated, or even the ways we can adapt, I should say, mitigate and adapt with blockchain implementation and adoption. So in conclusion, I wanted to share that with you, and to finish and conclude, I'd like to say that knowledge, we hear it all the time that knowledge is power, but shared knowledge is more powerful. And I think that as we move forward with new technologies such as blockchain, we'll be able to harness blockchain architecture to help, like I said, mitigate and help us adapt to climate change, and these extreme weather aberrations, which will continue. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk. Sorry you can't see me. I didn't have any slides, so that was a good thing.
Many thanks. Many thanks for your presentation. Well, it's quite an interesting application too of the blockchain. We see how we can connect everything, land registry, with environmental information, which I think it's a good point to complement all the information of property. So now, theoretically, we have time for questions and answers, but I think that all of them were addressed through the chat. I don't know if anybody wants to raise the hand and ask a question face to face, or no. If not, maybe Michelle, we can do the closure.
Yeah, so we can do. I can close the session. So first of all, thanks so much, Rosa, for chairing this session, and thanks all the participants for joining this seminar. It's always exhausting to hear like more than 10 papers on interesting topics, especially in COVID times where you have to watch your screen all the time. So I think everybody needs some food probably and some drinks. So I'm not going to talk that long. There are two things I would like to discuss, or I would like to say. So first, I would like to thank Rosa again and the fabulous people at the Housing Chair in Tarragona. They were really helpful in setting this up, and probably will be very helpful in having new meetings of this working group. If the participants have any other people or people that might be interested in this working group, please let them contact Rosa and me, so we will put you on a mailing list and we will